It was a rhythmic, annoying sound that echoed off the marble floors of the U.S. Embassy lobby in Jeddah. Squeak, swish, squeak. Martha pushed the mop with the practiced lethargy of a woman who had been invisible for 3 years. At 62, with her gray hair pulled back in a severe, fraying bun and her blue maintenance uniform slightly too large for her frame, she was part of the furniture. The Marines at the security checkpoint didn't scan her face. They scanned her badge. "Morning, Martha," Corporal Miller said, not looking up from his tablet. "Trash in the break room is overflowing again." "I'll get it, sir," Martha said. Her voice was a soft, grandmotherly rasps. It was a carefully constructed instrument, designed to be forgettable. She moved past the heavy ballistic glass, limp slightly pronounced on her left side. To the casual observer, it was arthritis. In reality, it was a remnant of a shrapnel injury from a botched extraction in Belgrade 20 years ago. Asset 09 was officially dead. Martha the janitor was alive and well, cleaning up coffee spills for diplomats who debated policy while the city outside burned. She entered the break room. As she emptied the bin, her eyes scanned the room, not looking for trash, but for anomalies. A secure phone left off the hook, a briefing paper left on a table. Old habits didn't die. They just went deep cover. She walked to the window. Outside, the protesters were gathering at the main gate. It was the usual Friday crowd, chanting anti-American slogans. But today, the energy was different. Tenser. The crowd moved with a coordination that suggested command and control, not organic anger. Martha narrowed her eyes. She saw a man in a red keffiyeh standing near a food cart, not shouting, but talking into a wrist microphone. Spotter. Something is coming, she thought. She tied the trash bag. She needed to be near the ambassador's daughter, just in case. The principal, Sophie Stevenson, was 16, bored, and currently hiding in the library on the 3rd floor. She was the ambassador's daughter, a title that meant she lived in a golden cage surrounded by men with guns. "Excuse me, Miss Sophie," Martha said, pushing her cart into the room. "Need to dust the shelves." Sophie looked up from her phone. She liked Martha. The old woman was the only one who didn't treat her like a national security asset. "Hey, Martha, do you think they'll let me go to the mall this weekend?" "I doubt it, dear," Martha said, moving her feather duster over the spine of a leather-bound history book. "The crowds are loud today." "They're always loud," Sophie sighed, slumping in her chair. Martha moved closer to the window, using the dusting as cover to check the perimeter again. The man in the red keffiyeh was gone. In his place, a heavy water tanker truck was idling at the first checkpoint. It was riding low on its suspension, too low for water. "Sophie," Martha said, her voice dropping the grandmotherly waver. "Why don't you go to your father's office? The safe room drill is scheduled for this afternoon." "It is," Sophie frowned. "Dad didn't tell me. He probably forgot. You know how busy he is." It was a lie. There was no drill. But Martha knew physics. If that truck breached the first gate, the blast wave would shatter the library windows. "Fine," Sophie gathered her bag. "I'll go bother him." "Good girl," Martha said. "Take the back stairs. It's faster." As Sophie left, Martha reached into her cleaning cart. Underneath the stack of paper towels was a small, encrypted radio she hadn't turned on in 3 years. She thumbed the power switch. Silence. No chatter on the embassy frequency. Jamming, she realized. This isn't a protest. It's a siege. The explosion didn't sound like a bang. It felt like a punch to the chest. The water truck detonated at the main gate, The blast wave punched through the reinforced concrete wall, shredding the Marine Guard post and sending a fireball rolling across the courtyard. In the library, the windows imploded. Shards of glass turned into shrapnel, embedding themselves in the far wall where Sophie had been sitting 30 seconds ago. Martha was already on the floor, curled behind the heavy oak desk. The floor heaved. Dust rained down from the ceiling. Klaxons began to wail. Whoop! 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 Security alert! Breach at main gate, all personnel to safe havens. Martha stood up, shaking the glass from her hair. She checked her limbs. No blood. She grabbed the radio from the cart. It was useless for transmission, but she could scan. She twisted the dial. Breach! Breach! They're through the wall! Technicals in the courtyard! A Marine's voice, screaming over the sound of AK-47 fire. Hostiles in the lobby! They're wearing SSU uniforms! Martha's blood ran cold. SSU, the state security unit. The host nation's own police force had turned. This was a coup. She didn't run for the employee shelter in the basement. That was a kill box. She ran for the stairs. She had to get to the ambassador's suite. She had to get to Sophie. She moved differently now. The limp was gone. She took the stairs 2 at a time, her breathing controlled, her mind shifting into the cold, calculated processing of Asset 09. The stairwell was full of smoke. Panic-stricken staff were rushing down, coughing and screaming. Go down! Move! A security officer yelled, shoving people along. Martha pushed against the tide. Hey, you! Maintenance! The officer grabbed her arm. Basement, now! Martha looked at him. He was young, terrified, and gripping his sidearm so hard his hand was shaking. I have to clean the executive floor, Martha said, her eyes vacant. Are you crazy? We're under attack. Orders are orders, she muttered, pulling her arm free with a subtle twist that targeted the officer's weak thumb joint. He let go, confused by the sudden pain. Martha vanished into the smoke above. She reached the 3rd floor. The hallway was a war zone. 2 terrorists in black tactical gear were moving room to room, executing staff. Martha pressed herself into a janitorial alcove. She had no weapon, only a master keycard and a spray bottle of industrial cleaner. She watched them pass. They were efficient, professional. One of them stopped at the door to the ambassador's suite. He placed a breaching charge on the lock. Sophie is inside, Martha thought. She scanned the alcove. A fire extinguisher. She grabbed it. She pulled the pin. As the terrorist braced for the breach, Martha stepped out. Hey! She shouted. The terrorist turned. She unleashed the extinguisher. A cloud of white chemical powder blinded him. He fired wildly, bullets tearing up the ceiling. Martha swung the heavy steel cylinder. It connected with his helmet with a sickening clang. He dropped. The second terrorist spun around. Martha didn't have time to swing again. She threw the extinguisher at him and dove through the open door of the server room next to the suite. Bullets chewed up the doorframe. She was cut off. But she was on the right floor. The heavy steel door swung inward on silent, well-oiled hinges. The movement displaced the air, creating a momentary vacuum that sucked the acrid sting of the chloramine gas out of the hallway and into the sterile, pressurized environment of the safe room. Martha stepped over the threshold, her boots leaving faint, bloody prints on the pristine carpet. She kept her pistol lowered, a weapon she had scavenged from the fallen Marine in the hallway, pressed tight against her thigh, hidden by the folds of her blue tunic. She wasn't entering a combat zone now. She was entering a sanctuary that had become a prison. The room was bathed in the low blue wash of emergency lighting. It was windowless, lined with reinforced concrete and shielded against electronic surveillance. Banks of monitors covered the far wall. most of them showing static or the no signal error message of the severed feeds. "Miss Sophie?" Martha whispered. Silence. The room appeared empty. The leather couches were overturned. A heavy mahogany desk had been dragged toward the door to form a crude barricade. Though against the shaped charges the terrorists had been preparing, it would have been as effective as paper. Martha moved deeper into the room. She knew the layout. She knew the hiding spots. "Sophie, look at me. It's Martha. I clean the floors." A shadow moved behind the desk. A small, trembling hand rose, clutching a heavy brass letter opener. "Stay back!" The voice was high, brittle with hysteria. "I'll kill you! I swear I'll kill you!" Martha stopped. She raised her free hand, palm open. She kept the hand with the gun behind her back. She needed to de-escalate. This was the matriarch dynamic the mission profile warned against, the emotional entanglement that could compromise tactical judgment. But looking at the girl, shivering in her school uniform, Martha felt the cold armor of her training crack. "I know you will," Martha said, her voice dropping to a soothing, grandmotherly cadence. "You're a brave girl. Your father told me you were brave." At the mention of her father, Sophie's resolve crumpled. She stood up slowly. She looked at Martha, really looked at her. She saw the familiar blue uniform, the gray bun, the face she had passed in the hallway 1,000 times without seeing. But she also saw the blood spattered on the collar. She saw the way the old woman stood, not with the stoop of a servant, but with the balanced lethality of a predator. "Martha?" Sophie lowered the letter opener. You have a gun." "I found it," Martha lied smoothly. "Outside. The bad men dropped it." She stepped closer. The room smelled of recycled air and terror. "We have to go, Sophie. The air in the hallway is bad, but the stairwell is clear. We're going up to the roof." "My dad," Sophie choked out. "I saw him on the monitors, before they cut the feed. They took him to the basement. We have to help him." Martha felt a cold stone settle in her gut. The basement. That was where the secure servers were. That was where the Blue Jay protocol, the dirty bomb, was housed. If Akram had taken the ambassador there, it wasn't just for an execution. It was for an interrogation. "We will," Martha said, bridging the distance and taking the letter opener from Sophie's unresisting hand. "But first I need to get you safe. That's what he would want." She grabbed a bottle of water from the emergency supply shelf and soaked a clean hand towel. She tied it around Sophie's face, covering her nose and mouth. "Don't breathe through your nose until we are past the third landing," Martha instructed, her tone shifting imperceptibly from comfort to command. "The cleaning supplies. They mixed. It burns." Sophie nodded, her eyes wide above the mask. She looked at Martha, searching for the frail old woman she knew, but finding only a stranger in her skin. "Who are you?" Sophie whispered. Martha paused. She looked at her reflection in the dark monitor screen. She saw the operative. She saw the killer. She saw the ghost of a woman who had died 30 years ago to become this weapon. "I'm the janitor," Martha said. "And we have a mess to clean up." She took Sophie's hand. It was cold. Martha's grip was iron. "Stay behind me. If I stop, you stop. If I tell you to run, you run until your lungs burn, and you don't look back. Do you understand?" "Yes." Martha turned back to the door. The hallway was quiet now, the gas dissipating into the upper vents. The bodies of the breach team lay where they had fallen, twisted and silent. "Close your eyes," Martha ordered as they stepped out. Sophie didn't close them. She stared at the dead men, at their red, blistered faces. She gagged, stumbling. Martha yanked her forward, not unkindly, but with necessary force. "Dirt is dirt," Martha muttered to herself, stepping over the corpse of the driller. They reached the stairwell door. Martha pushed it open. The air here was clearer, cooler. They began the climb to the roof, leaving the safety of the box for the chaos of the kill zone. As the heavy fire door clicked shut behind them, Martha checked her watch. The extraction window was closed. The Marines were dead. It was just an old woman and a child against an army. And for the first time in 20 years, Martha felt the thrill of the odds. The burn notice. The executive corridor was a tunnel of drifting smoke and silence. The only sound was the distant, rhythmic thumping of heavy machine gun fire from the lobby 3 floors below, a bass drum beating out the tempo of the siege. Martha pulled Sophie into the ambassador's private office. It was a room of mahogany and leather, smelling of pipe tobacco and the sharp, ozone scent of the fried server racks in the adjacent room. The large window behind the desk had been shattered by the shockwave of the initial truck bomb, leaving the room open to the hot, dusty wind of the city. "Stay down," Martha ordered, pushing Sophie into the knee well of the heavy desk. "Don't look at the window. Snipers on the minarets have a line of sight." Sophie curled into a ball, clutching her knees. She was shaking, her eyes wide and unseeing. She was in shock. Martha moved to the ambassador's personal terminal. It was a hardened workstation, encased in a steel shell, designed to survive exactly this kind of catastrophe. She needed to know where the extraction team was. She needed to know why the QRF, the Quick Reaction Force, hadn't already repelled from the roof. She wiped the blood from her hands onto her blue tunic before touching the keyboard. She didn't use the ambassador's login. She typed a sequence she had memorized 20 years ago, a ghost login that bypassed the State Department firewalls and connected directly to the agency's black network. User Asset 09. Status active. The screen flickered. A connection bar loaded slowly, fighting through the jamming signal that was blanketing the embassy. Connection established. Uplink. Langley. "Come on," Martha whispered. "Give me the extract coordinates." A window popped up. It wasn't a map. It was a text file flagged with the crimson banner of a burn notice. Martha read the text. Her breath hitched in her throat. Priority, Flash Override Mission Update, Omega Objective 1, Secure Blue Jay Data. Objective 2, Secure Asset Sophie. Objective 3, Sanitized Site. Martha stared at the words. Sanitize. In the sterile language of the agency, sanitize didn't mean clean. It meant erase. It meant leave nothing behind that could compromise the state. She scrolled down. Notes. Ambassador Stevenson compromised. Interrogation risk. High action. Terminate on site. Do not extract. The room seemed to tilt. The moral injury hit her harder than any bullet. The man she had served coffee to for 3 years. The man whose office she dusted. The father of the girl shivering under the desk. Her orders were to let him die. Or kill him herself if the terrorists didn't do it fast enough. The agency believed he had talked, or they feared he would. To them, he was no longer a diplomat. He was a liability. A loose end. Martha looked down at Sophie. The girl was staring at the floor, rocking slightly. "Martha?" Sophie's voice was small, fragile. "My dad. The monitors. I saw them drag him. Is the rescue team coming for him too?" Martha looked back at the screen. Terminate on sight. This was the double bind of her existence. She was the protector, the matriarch, but she was also the asset, the weapon of a cold, indifferent state. To save the girl, she had to obey the agency. To obey the agency, She had to betray the girl. She closed the file. She initiated the data wipe sequence for the terminal. Deleting. Martha turned to Sophie. Her face was a mask of calm, the perfect lie she had worn for 2 decades. Yes, Martha lied. The word tasted like ash. The team is coming for everyone. But we have to get to the roof first to signal them. We have to clear the way for your father. Sophie nodded, desperation making her believe the lie. Okay, let's go. Martha helped her stand. She checked the load in her pistol. She felt a cold, hard stone settle in her gut. She wasn't just fighting terrorists anymore. She was fighting her own handlers. The extraction team wasn't coming to save the ambassador. They were coming to clean up the mess. And if Martha got in the way, they would sanitize her too. Stay close, Martha said, her voice dropping to a low growl. We're moving to the stairwell. She led the girl toward the door. As they passed the shattered window, a gust of wind blew a stack of papers off the desk. They fluttered around the room like dying birds. One of them landed near Martha's boot. It was a picture of the ambassador and Sophie smiling on a boat. Martha stepped on it. She didn't look down. She couldn't afford to be human right now. She had to be the cleaner. Chapter closed, she whispered to herself. She kicked the door open and led the lamb away from the slaughter, carrying the weight of the father's death sentence in her pocket. The service stairwell was a concrete throat that swallowed the light. The emergency bulbs had burned out hours ago, leaving only the gray, filtering haze of smoke to illuminate the steps. It smelled of wet cement, unwashed bodies, and the distinct, sulfurous reek of cheap explosives. Martha pushed Sophie against the rough wall, her hand clamped firmly over the girl's shoulder. They were on the landing between the 4th and 5th floors. Above them, the sounds of drilling and shouting echoed down like distorted thunder. Don't move, Martha whispered, her voice barely audible over the ringing in her ears. She checked the magazine of the Sig Sauer she had taken from the dead guard. 7 rounds. 7 rounds to clear 3 floors of hostile territory with a civilian in tow. The math was bad. Are they close? Sophie asked, her voice hitching. They are mining the roof access, Martha said, her mind analyzing the acoustic signatures echoing off the concrete. They know the helicopters are coming. They want to turn the helipad into a claymore mine. Martha looked at the heavy steel door leading to the 5th floor, the maintenance level. It was her domain, the place where the air handlers, the water pumps, and the elevator winches lived. If she could get in there, she could bypass the stairs and access the roof hatch from the mechanical room. But the door was locked, and not with a key card. It was a mechanical deadbolt she had installed herself 5 years ago to keep lazy interns from smoking on the roof. She reached into her pocket for her master keys. The jingle of brass seemed deafening in the silence. Clack. A sound from above. A boot hitting the metal railing. Martha froze. She looked up through the gap in the stairs. A beam of light cut through the smoke, sweeping the landing below. Check the doors, a voice commanded in Arabic. Akram wants the flank secured. 2 men, coming down. Martha looked at the locked door, then at Sophie. There was no time to fumble with keys. The fatal funnel of the stairwell was about to become a shooting gallery. Sophie, Martha whispered, pointing to the dark space beneath the concrete stairs. Get in there. Curl up. Cover your ears. Martha, I can't. Go! Sophie scrambled into the cramped, dust-filled space. Martha didn't hide. She couldn't. She needed to draw their fire away from the girl. She stepped into the center of the landing, raised the pistol, and waited. She breathed in, 1. She breathed out, 2. The beam of light swung down. It hit her face, blinding her. Contact! The shout was followed instantly by the roar of an AK-74U. The bullets chipped the concrete wall inches from Martha's head, sending stinging dust into her eyes. Martha didn't flinch. She dropped to one knee, letting the shooter's recoil carry his aim high. She fired. Bang! Bang! 2 shots. Controlled. Precise. The flashlight spun wildly as the first man tumbled down the stairs, his chest ruined. He hit the landing with a wet thud, sliding to a stop near Martha's boots. The second man was smarter. He didn't rush. He stayed on the upper landing, firing blindly over the railing. Bullets sparked off the metal banister, ricocheting dangerously around the confined space. "Grenade!" he shouted. Martha's blood ran cold. She heard the ping of a spoon flying off a hand grenade. There was no time to run, no time to shoot. "Sophie, stay down!" Martha screamed. She grabbed the dead body of the first terrorist. With a grunt of exertion that tore at the muscles in her back, she heaved the corpse up, holding it like a shield. The grenade clattered onto the landing. It spun on the concrete, coming to rest 3 feet away. Martha threw herself into the corner, dragging the dead weight of the man over her body. She curled into a ball, pressing her face into his blood-soaked vest. Boom! The explosion was a physical hammer blow. The concussion wave slammed Martha against the wall. Shrapnel shredded the dead man's back, turning him into a sponge of meat and Kevlar. The noise was absolute, a white-hot spike that drove directly into her brain. Dust filled the air, thick and choking. Martha lay still. Her ears were ringing with a high-pitched whine that drowned out the world. She tasted copper. She checked her limbs, still attached. The human shield had worked. She pushed the corpse off her. It flopped heavily onto the floor. "Sophie?" she rasped, unable to hear her own voice. A hand reached out from under the stairs. It was shaking. Sophie crawled out, covered in gray dust, her eyes wide with shock, but alive. Martha looked up at the stairs. The second man would be coming down to check his kill. She stood up. The world swayed. She gripped the railing to steady herself. Her pistol was gone, knocked from her hand by the blast. She scanned the floor. It was buried somewhere under the debris. She looked at the dead man's AK-74U. It was smashed, the receiver bent by the impact of his fall. Useless. Footsteps. Heavy. Confident. The second terrorist appeared through the smoke. He was smiling. He saw the devastation. He saw the old woman leaning against the wall, unarmed, covered in blood. He leveled his rifle. "Die, witch," he sneered in English. Martha didn't beg. She didn't look for a weapon. She looked at his boots. They were wet. The stairwell was slick with the condensation from the humidity she had cranked up earlier. She looked at the loose concrete step he was about to put his weight on, the one damaged by the grenade. Physics, she thought. Leverage. She didn't move to attack him. She kicked the railing support post next to her, the one that held the structural tension of the damaged landing. Crack. The concrete beneath the man's feet gave way. It wasn't a large collapse, just a shift, but it was enough. His foot slipped. He lurched forward, his balance gone, his finger clenching on the trigger reflexively. A burst of gunfire hit the ceiling. He tumbled forward, falling past Martha. She didn't let him pass. As he fell, she grabbed the strap of his rifle and yanked. His neck snapped back with the momentum. He crashed face first onto the landing, the wind knocked out of him. Before he could recover, Martha was on him. She didn't have a knife. She grabbed the jagged shard of concrete lying next to her hand. She didn't hesitate. She brought it down. Once. Twice. The struggle stopped. Martha sat back on her heels, gasping for air. The stairwell was silent again, save for the dripping of something wet on the stone. She looked at her hands. They were gray with dust and red with blood. She wasn't a janitor anymore. She was something ancient, something that survived in the dark. Sophie was staring at her. The girl wasn't screaming. She was just watching, her childhood evaporating in the gloom. "We have to go," Martha said, standing up. Her knees popped, a sharp agony she ignored. She retrieved the dead man's rifle. It was functional. She walked to the maintenance door. The blast had warped the frame, springing the lock. She kicked it open. Cool air rushed out. The hum of the heavy machinery. Her sanctuary. "Inside," Martha ordered. Sophie stepped over the bodies, her face pale. "Martha, you killed them." "I took out the trash," Martha said, her voice flat. "Don't look back." She ushered the girl inside and barricaded the door with a heavy steel locker. They were in the mechanical heart of the building now. Above them was the roof and the QRF. Martha touched the pocket where the burn notice was hidden. The men on the roof were supposed to be saviors, but she knew better. She had just fought her way through hell, only to realize the devil was waiting for her at the finish line. "One more flight," she whispered. She checked the rifle. Full magazine. She wasn't going up there to surrender. She was going up there to negotiate. And her currency was lead. The maintenance ladder vibrated against Martha's palms. A rhythmic trembling transmitted through the steel from the heavy HVAC units on the roof. The air in the shaft grew colder with every rung, the smell of dust and grease giving way to the smell of ozone and aviation fuel. "Keep climbing," Martha whispered, her voice tight. "Don't look down." Sophie was breathing hard below her, small whimpers of exertion escaping her throat. The girl was running on adrenaline fumes, her movements jerky and uncoordinated. Martha reached down, grabbing the strap of Sophie's backpack, and hauled her up the last few feet to the service platform. They were just below the roof hatch. The sound of the wind outside was a dull roar, punctuated by the distinct, chopping thrum of helicopter rotors. "Rotor wash," Martha analyzed, the soundscape painting a tactical picture in her mind. Heavy, twin engine, likely a Black Hawk or a Pave Hawk, low altitude, holding station. She cracked the hatch. A sliver of gray light and a blast of hot, smoke-filled air rushed into the shaft. She peered out, keeping her profile low. The roof of the embassy was a flat expanse of gravel and ventilation units, now transformed into a chaotic battlefield. Smoke billowed from the crater in the courtyard below, drifting up in thick, choking columns. But the roof itself was occupied. 3 of Akram's men were crouched behind the main air-conditioning chiller, their AK-74s trained on the stairwell door, the door Martha would have exited if she hadn't taken the maintenance route. They were setting up a crossfire, waiting for the hero to burst through. Martha scanned the sky. The helicopter was there, a dark shape hovering 200 feet above the perimeter wall. It was unmarked. Matte black. No navigation lights. It wasn't a standard medevac bird. It bristled with antennae and the distinct pods of electronic countermeasures. Sad, Martha realized, her blood running cold. Special Activities Division, the cleanup crew. "Are they here?" Sophie asked, moving to peek over the rim. Martha shoved her down. "Stay. Quiet." She watched. A cable dropped from the helicopter. Fast roping, 4 operators slid down with practiced fluid efficiency. They hit the roof of the embassy annex 50 meters away. They moved differently than the Marines. They moved like predators. Akram's men on the main roof saw the helicopter and opened fire. Tracers zipped into the sky. The response from the hovering aircraft was immediate. The minigun mounted in the door roared, a sound like canvas ripping. Brrrt. The concrete chiller unit disintegrated. The 3 terrorists behind it were turned into red mist and gravel dust in less than a second. It was an overwhelming display of firepower. "They got them!" Sophie gasped, hope flooding her voice. "Martha, wave to them! We're here!" Martha didn't wave. She pulled the hatch shut, leaving only a tiny crack for observation. She watched the black-clad operators on the annex roof. They were sweeping the area. One of them found a wounded Marine guard, a survivor from the initial breach who had crawled up there. The Marine raised a hand, signaling for help. The lead operator didn't call for a medic. He raised his suppressed rifle. Foot. 2 shots. The Marine's hand dropped. The operator moved on, stepping over the body. Martha felt the air leave her lungs. The moral injury she had been suppressing flared up, a hot iron in her chest. This wasn't a rescue mission. This was a sanitization operation. The agency wasn't here to save the ambassador or his staff. They were here to erase the mistake. The Blue Jay data was the priority. The people were liabilities. "Martha?" Sophie tugged at her sleeve. "Why aren't we going out?" Martha turned to the girl. How could she explain that the monsters inside the building were trying to kill them for ideology, but the monsters outside were trying to kill them for paperwork? "They aren't friends, Sophie," Martha said, her voice hollow. "But they're American. I see the helicopter." "They are cleaners," Martha said, the term tasting like ash. "They are here to make sure no one talks about what happened today, including us." The radio on Martha's belt, the one she took from the dead terrorist, crackled. The jamming was still active on the lower frequencies, but the proximity to the helicopter's powerful comms array allowed a signal to bleed through. "Sierra 1 to Overwatch. Roof sector clear. No sign of the asset or the VIP. Moving to breach." "Copy, Sierra 1. Sanitize on site. No witnesses. We cannot have the ambassador on CNN explaining how we lost a dirty bomb precursor." Sophie heard it. The color drained from her face, leaving her looking like a porcelain doll that had been dropped. "My dad," she whispered. "They want to kill my dad." Martha grabbed Sophie's shoulders, shaking her slightly to break the shock. "Listen to me. We are in the kill box. If we stay here, they find us. If we go out there, they shoot us. We have to disappear." "How?" Sophie sobbed. "We're trapped." Martha looked around the mechanical room. Her eyes landed on the main intake fan for the building's HVAC system. It was a massive industrial turbine, currently spinning at low idle. The ductwork below it was large enough to crawl through, and it led straight down into the secure server room in the basement. The belly of the beast. "We aren't going up," Martha said, holstering her weapon. "We're going down. We're going to the one place they won't shoot at because it holds the data they want." "The basement?" "The server room," Martha corrected. "We're going to beat them to the prize, and we're going to use it as a shield." She moved to the fan housing. She used the butt of the rifle to smash the locking pin on the maintenance access panel. "Sierra 1, breaching roof access in 5, 4. The count was starting. "Inside," Martha ordered, pushing Sophie into the dark, greasy throat of the ventilation system. "Crawl until you hit metal. Do not stop." Martha climbed in after her, pulling the panel back into place just as the roof hatch above them was blown off its hinges by a breaching charge. Boom! Debris rained down on the metal casing of the fan. Boots hit the floor of the mechanical room. The cleaners were inside. Martha held her breath, lying flat in the duct, watching the shadows of the operators through the grate. They moved past, their laser sights sweeping the room. "Clear," one voice said, moving to the stairwell. They didn't look in the vents. Why would they? They were looking for targets, not rats. Martha exhaled slowly. She nudged Sophie's foot. They began the long, claustrophobic crawl down into the dark, moving deeper into the trap to find the only leverage that mattered. The ventilation shaft was a vertical lung, exhaling the stale, recycled breath of the embassy into the night. Gravity was the enemy here. Martha braced her back against one wall of the galvanized steel chute and her boots against the other, creating a friction break. Her thigh muscles burned with a lactic fire that felt like molten lead. Below her, Sophie whimpered. The girl was sliding, her sneakers squeaking against the smooth metal, her grip failing on the rivets. "Lock your knees," Martha hissed, her voice echoing in the confined acoustic chamber. "Press outward, become part of the wall." I can't, it's too slippery." Sophie slid another foot, her backpack scraping loudly. The sound traveled down the shaft like a dinner bell for anyone listening in the basement. Martha didn't offer comfort. She offered physics. She reached down, grabbing the strap of Sophie's backpack with a grip strength honed by decades of wringing out heavy mops and snapping necks. She jerked the girl upward, slamming her against the metal. "You don't fall," Martha said, her face inches from Sophie's in the gloom. "If you fall, you hit the turbine blades at the bottom. They will turn you into pink mist before you even feel the pain. Do you understand?" The graphic violence of the statement shocked Sophie into focus. Her breathing hitched, then slowed. She nodded. She pressed her legs outward, finding the friction point. "Good. Now move." They descended in a rhythm of agony. Slide, lock, breathe, slide. The air grew colder as they went deeper. The humidity of the upper levels vanished, replaced by a bone-dry, supercooled draft. They were approaching the server farm, the zero room. It was kept at a constant 50 degrees Fahrenheit to prevent the processors from melting down. To Martha, it felt like walking into a crypt. The shaft widened. Below them, the massive intake fan was visible through a wire mesh grate. It was a 10-foot diameter industrial turbine. Thankfully, the earlier power fluctuations had tripped its breaker. The blades were spinning lazily on residual momentum, slicing the air with a rhythmic whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Martha reached the grate. She peered through the mesh. The server room was a vast, blue-lit cavern. Rows of black monoliths, the server racks, stretched out in perfect geometric formation. The only sound was the aggressive, high-pitched whine of thousands of cooling fans and the low, 60 hertz thrum of the power distribution units. It was empty. Or so it seemed. Martha used her multi-tool to unscrew the bolts of the grate. She worked with a terrifying speed, her hands moving independently of her conscious thought. She wasn't thinking about the bolts. She was thinking about the SAD team on the roof. They would clear the upper floors floor by floor. That gave her maybe 6 minutes before they breached the basement elevator. Clang. The last bolt fell. Martha caught the grate before it could crash onto the turbine housing. She set it aside silently. "Drop," she ordered. They lowered themselves onto the fan housing, then jumped the 6 feet to the raised floor of the server room. The floor tiles were perforated to allow cold air to flow up from the plenum below. Martha's boots hit the metal with a hollow thud. Stay low, Martha whispered. The aisles are lines of sight. She led Sophie toward the main terminal at the center of the room. This was the objective. The Blue Jay data wasn't just a file. It was likely a physical drive in the air-gapped array. The agency wanted it secured or destroyed. Martha reached the console. It was locked, displaying a biometric prompt. Access denied. Please present credentials. Do you know your father's password? Martha asked, knowing the answer was likely no. No, Sophie said, shivering in the cold air. He kept work separate. Martha looked at the hardened steel casing of the server rack. She couldn't hack it. She wasn't a cyber warfare specialist. She was a cleaner. When you can't pick the lock, you break the door. She raised the rifle she had taken from the terrorist. What are you doing? Sophie gasped. Percussive maintenance, Martha said. But before she could smash the lock, the sound of a heavy mechanical latch cycling echoed through the room. Thud hiss. The main blast door to the server room, the one leading to the elevator lobby, was opening. Martha grabbed Sophie and threw her into the narrow gap between two server racks. Don't breathe, she whispered. The door swung open. It wasn't the SAID team. They would have breached with explosives. This was a keycard entry. Two men walked in. They wore the uniforms of the embassy security detail, but they moved wrong. They swept the room with their weapons, but their discipline was loose. Check the racks, one said in Arabic. Akram wants the drive before the Americans burn the building. Terrorists, the backup team. They had come down the service elevator while Martha and Sophie were in the vents. Martha pressed her back against the warm metal of the server rack. She was trapped. Two hostiles in front. The SAID death squad coming from above, and she was holding a 16-year-old girl in a room with only one exit. She looked at the fire suppression system panel on the wall opposite her. A yellow sign with bold black letters. Warning, halon discharge system, automatic lockdown, halon gas. It displaced oxygen to starve a fire. It would also starve a human. If she triggered it, the room would seal. The oxygen would drop to zero. The terrorists would suffocate. But so would Sophie. This was the double bind again. The calculated risk. The thankless decision. Martha looked at the gas masks hanging on the emergency station 10 feet away. 2 masks. 2 terrorists. 1 Martha. 1 Sophie. Stay here. Martha breathed into Sophie's ear. When I move, you count to 3. Then run for the masks on the wall. Do not stop for me. Martha! Count, Martha commanded. She stepped out from the aisle. Hey! She shouted. The terrorists spun around. Sophie scrambled from the gap between the server racks, her sneakers squeaking violently against the raised floor tiles. She didn't look back. She ran toward the emergency station on the far wall, her body low, moving with the desperate speed of a prey animal seeking a burrow. The 2 terrorists spun toward the movement, their rifles raised, tracking the girl. Martha didn't shout. She didn't hesitate. She stepped out from the cover of the rack, the stolen AK-74U tucked tight into her shoulder. She wasn't aiming to kill. She was aiming to disrupt. She fired a controlled 3-round burst into the metal casing of the server rack directly next to the lead terrorist's head. Crack, crack, crack. Sparks showered the man's face. He flinched, instinctively ducking away from the shrapnel. His partner panicked, swinging his weapon wildly toward Martha and depressing the trigger. A spray of bullets chewed through the sensitive electronics of the server farm, sending plastic shards and silicon debris flying like confetti. "Get down!" the leader shouted in Arabic. Martha dropped to a knee. She didn't return fire. She reached up and grabbed the manual release lever for the halon suppression system. It was a heavy, red-painted handle protected by a break glass cover. She smashed the glass with the butt of her rifle and yanked the lever down with all her weight. Ka-whoosh! The sound was deafening, like a jet engine igniting indoors. High-pressure nozzles in the ceiling erupted. The halon gas didn't drift. It slammed into the room, a heavy, freezing chemical blanket designed to displace oxygen instantly. The temperature in the server room plummeted 30 degrees in seconds. The air turned white, a dense, opaque fog that swallowed the rows of black monoliths. "Mask!" Martha screamed, though the roar of the gas drowned her out. She dropped her rifle and sprinted through the whiteout. She counted her steps, navigating by memory of the floor plan. 5 steps. Turn. 3 steps. She collided with the wall. Her hands fumbled blindly until she found the plastic casing of the emergency mask station. One mask was gone. Sophie had it. Martha grabbed the second mask, ripping it from its Velcro restraints. She fell to the floor, where the air was still marginally breathable, and pulled the rubber seal over her face. She tightened the straps, clearing the seal with a sharp exhale. Hiss, click. Filtered air rushed into her lungs. She looked around. The visibility was less than 2 feet. The halon fog was a physical barrier, scattering the blue emergency lights into a diffuse, ghostly glow. Across the room, the sounds of the terrorists had changed from shouting to wet, desperate gagging. They were firing blindly into the mist, the muzzle flashes illuminating the fog like lightning in a storm clouds. But without masks, their OODA loop was collapsing. Hypoxia was setting in. Their brains were starving, panic, confusion, unconsciousness, death. The firing stopped. Then came the sound of bodies hitting the floor. Heavy, uncoordinated thuds. Martha crawled toward where she had last seen Sophie. She found the girl curled in a ball under a desk, the gas mask covering her entire face, her chest heaving. Sophie's eyes were wide, terrified, staring into the white void. Martha grabbed Sophie's shoulder. She gave a thumbs up. Alive. But the silence didn't last. From the ventilation shaft above, the same one they had used to enter, came a metallic clank. Then another. Then a controlled detonation. Thump. The service hatch in the ceiling blew inward. A rappel line dropped. The SAD team. The cleaners. They dropped into the fog with the heavy, rhythmic thud of magnetic boots engaging the metal floor. Martha counted them by the sound of their impacts. 1, 2, 3, 4. They wouldn't be affected by the halon. They would be wearing full-seal rebreathers or M50 masks with independent air supplies. They were prepared for a chemical environment. Martha pressed a finger to her mask's voice diaphragm, signaling Sophie to remain perfectly still. The SAD operators moved differently than the terrorists. They didn't shout. They didn't spray fire. They moved with a terrifying, silent coordination. Martha could see the beams of their weapon-mounted lights cutting through the fog like lightsabers. "Thermal is washed out," a voice crackled over a localized frequency, likely a short-range comms loop that Martha's stolen radio picked up. "The gas is too cold. We have 0 visibility." "Switch to active sonar pulse," another voice commanded. "Sweep the room. Identify the targets. Sanitize." Martha's blood ran cold. They weren't using eyes. They were using technology. They would map the room with sound waves or millimeter wave radar, identify the human shapes, and execute them. She looked at the server rack next to her. It was humming, the fans struggling against the thick gas. She needed to blind their sensors. She pulled the Blue Jay drive, or what she hoped was the target drive, from the main console she was hiding under. But she didn't run. She reached into her belt and pulled out her last chemical grenade. It wasn't smoke. It wasn't CS gas. It was a thermite incendiary grenade she had lifted from the dead Marine in the lobby hours ago. Thermite burns at 4,000 degrees Fahrenheit. It doesn't need oxygen. It burns underwater, and in a room full of sensitive electronics and halon gas. It creates a thermal bloom so intense it blinds every sensor in existence. "Close your eyes," Martha whispered to Sophie, though the girl couldn't hear her. She pushed Sophie's head down. Martha pulled the pin. She rolled the grenade toward the center of the room, directly under the main power distribution unit for the server farm. Sizzle. The grenade ignited. A blinding magnesium-white light erupted in the fog. The heat was instantaneous, fighting the cold of the halon. The thermite ate through the steel casing of the power unit, melting copper and plastic into slag. "Contact! Thermal spike! I'm blind!" an operator shouted. The power unit exploded. A massive electrical arc, blue and angry, jumped from the rack to the ceiling. The lights in the room blew out. The server fans died. The zero room was plunged into absolute chaotic darkness, lit only by the sputtering, hellish glow of the melting floor. "Move!" Martha pulled Sophie up. They didn't run away from the SAD team. They ran toward the blast door the terrorists had entered through. The electronic lock on the door was dead, fried by the EMP of the shorting power unit. But the manual release would work. Martha slammed into the heavy door. She grabbed the manual wheel. It was heavy, resistant. "Help me," she grunted. Sophie grabbed the wheel. Together, they heaved. Creak. The door cracked open. Martha shoved Sophie through into the corridor beyond. Bullets sparked against the doorframe as the SAD team began to fire blindly at the sound of the movement. Martha dived through the gap. She spun around and spun the wheel back, locking the dogs just as a heavy boot slammed against the other side. Thud. They were out. The cleaners were trapped in the halon-filled, burning server room. Martha ripped off her mask. The air in the corridor was stale, but it had oxygen. She gasped, her lungs burning. Did we win?" Sophie asked, trembling. Martha checked the magazine of her pistol. 2 rounds. "No," Martha said, looking down the dark hallway that led to the garage. "We just changed the battlefield." She looked at the data drive in her hand. The Blue Jay file. The thing everyone wanted. The thing everyone was dying for. "Now," Martha said, "we make a trade." The parking garage of the embassy was a cavern of reinforced concrete and shadows, smelling of gasoline, oil, and the stale, subterranean air of a bunker. The emergency lights here were dim, casting long, skeletal shadows across the rows of diplomatic vehicles. Martha pushed Sophie toward the ambassador's personal vehicle, a black, up-armored Chevrolet Suburban. It was a beast of a machine, plated with B6 ballistic steel and sitting on run-flat tires. It was a tank disguised as a luxury SUV. "Get in," Martha ordered, opening the heavy rear door. "Lock it. Get on the floorboards. Do not look out the windows." "What about you?" Sophie asked, her voice trembling as she climbed into the leather interior that still smelled of her father's cologne. "I have a phone call to make," Martha said. She slammed the door shut, the heavy thud testifying to the thickness of the armor. She moved to the front of the vehicle, using the engine block as cover. She pulled the stolen radio from her belt. The SAD team, the cleaners, were trapped in the server room, but their overwatch, the command element in the helicopter, was still watching. And they had snipers, If she drove out of the garage ramp now, a .50 caliber round through the engine block would stop them dead. She needed to negotiate safe passage, and she had the only currency that mattered. She keyed the mic. "Sierra Overwatch, this is Asset 09, she said. Her voice was calm, the professional cadence of a woman who had negotiated hostage exchanges in Beirut and Sarajevo. "I know you can hear me. The jamming is directional, and I'm on your frequency." Static hissed for 3 seconds. Then a voice cut through. Clear, cold, American. "Asset 09, you are in violation of a burn notice. Surrender the package and the girl. We will make it quick." "The package is a localized, dirty bomb precursor," Martha lied smoothly, escalating the stakes. "Or rather, the data regarding its location. And right now, that data is on a drive in my hand. But it's also set to upload to the New York Times secure drop via a dead man switch on my phone." "You're bluffing," the voice said. "The facility is jammed. You have no uplink." "I'm plugged into the ambassador's secure SATCOM in the SUV," Martha countered. "Hardline. Your jammers don't cover the high-frequency bursts. I push one button, and the agency's involvement in Project Blue Jay goes global. You lose the narrative. You lose the plausible deniability. And you go to prison." Silence. This was the double bind, applied to the enemy. If they killed her, the data leaked. If they let her go, they failed the mission. Martha knew bureaucrats. They feared exposure more than they feared death. "What are your terms?" Overwatch asked. The tone had shifted. He wasn't talking to a janitor anymore. He was talking to a peer. "I want the sniper on the north ramp stood down," Martha said. "I want a clear corridor to the airport. And I want you to confirm that the extraction team on the roof has been pulled back." "That is not possible. The site must be sanitized." "Then the data flies," Martha said. "And I'll make sure to mention that you authorized the strike on a U.S. ambassador." She waited. She checked the magazine of her stolen rifle. 1 full mag, 30 rounds. If the negotiation failed, she would have to shoot her way out of a concrete box against a helicopter. "Hold position," Overwatch said. "We are calculating." Martha looked at the SUV. Sophie was a dark shape huddled on the floor. The girl was learning the hardest lesson of her life, that the good guys weren't coming and the bad guys wore the same flag. Suddenly, the silence of the garage was shattered. Not by the Americans. The elevator doors at the far end of the garage, the ones leading up to the lobby, pinged. Ding! Martha spun around, raising her rifle. She hadn't called the elevator. The doors slid open. It wasn't the cleaners. They were still dealing with the halon gas upstairs. It was Akram. The terrorist leader stepped out, flanked by 4 of his remaining gunmen. He looked battered, his suit covered in dust from the initial breach. But his eyes were alive with the manic energy of a fanatic who realizes he is close to the prize. He saw the black SUV. He saw the old woman in the blue cleaning uniform holding an assault rifle. He smiled, a wolfish, bloody grin. "The maid!" Akram shouted, his voice echoing off the concrete walls. "And the car. I assume the girl is inside?" Martha didn't answer. She was pinned. Behind her was the ramp, covered by an American sniper. In front of her was a terrorist hit squad. She was in the fatal funnel. She keyed the radio one last time. "Sierra Overwatch," she whispered. "I have a counteroffer." "Go ahead, Asset 09. "I have 5 hostiles in the garage, heavily armed. They are moving to secure the package. If you want the drive, you have to come and get it. I'm pinned." "Copy," the voice said. "Sanitize the area." Martha dove behind the rear wheel of the SUV just as Akram's men opened fire. Bullets sparked off the armored chassis of the Suburban, whining into the darkness. "Sophie, stay down!" Martha screamed. She returned fire underneath the chassis, aiming for ankles. One of the terrorists went down, screaming. Then, the garage ramp door, the heavy steel shutter leading to the street, exploded inward. Boom. It wasn't Akram. It wasn't Martha. A black MH-6 Little Bird helicopter flared in the opening of the ramp, its rotors chopping the air with a deafening roar. The minigun mounted on the side spun up. The agency had decided to solve the problem the hard way. They weren't negotiating safe passage. They were initiating a scorched earth protocol. They were going to kill everyone in the garage. Akram, Martha, and Sophie, and sift through the ashes for the drive. "Welcome to the party," Martha muttered, checking her sights. She wasn't fighting for escape anymore. She was fighting for seconds. The sound of an M134 minigun is not a staccato rhythm of individual shots. It is a continuous, mechanical roar, like a chainsaw tearing through wet canvas. It is the sound of physics being applied to biology with overwhelming force. When the Little Bird helicopter flared in the garage entrance, the pilot didn't hesitate. He depressed the butterfly trigger, and the 6 rotating barrels of the cannon spun into a blur. A stream of 7.62 mm tracer rounds, burning bright orange, lashed out into the garage. Martha threw herself onto the concrete behind the Suburban's rear wheel well just as the air filled with supersonic lead. The effect on Akram's squad was instantaneous and absolute. The terrorists had been advancing, weapons raised, expecting a firefight with an old woman. Instead, they walked into a wall of disintegration. The high-velocity rounds didn't just penetrate, they pulverized. Concrete pillars were chewed apart, sending clouds of silica dust and stone shrapnel flying. Akram's men were cut down in mid-stride, their bodies jerking violently under the kinetic impact, before collapsing into ruined heaps of fabric and flesh. Akram survived the first second by sheer luck, diving behind a concrete support pillar. He was screaming, but the sound was swallowed by the deafening drone of the gun. Martha didn't watch the slaughter. She moved. She crawled to the driver's side door of the Suburban. The heavy B6 armored glass was spiderwebbed with impacts where stray rounds had struck, but the polycarbonate laminate held. She wrenched the door open and pulled herself into the driver's seat. "Stay down!" she screamed at Sophie, who was curled in the passenger footwell, hands over her ears, screaming a silent scream. The interior of the SUV was a sealed capsule, the sounds of the outside world muffled to a dull, vibrating thrum. Martha keyed the ignition. The heavy V8 engine roared to life, a deep bass note beneath the treble of the minigun. Outside, the minigun paused. The spin-down sound, a high-pitched whine, echoed in the sudden silence. The pilot was adjusting his angle. He had cleared the infantry. Now he was turning his attention to the vehicle. "He's going to punch through the roof," Martha analyzed, her mind racing through the ballistics of armored vehicles. The B6 plating was thickest on the doors and glass, designed to stop lateral ambushes. The roof armor was thinner. If the helicopter got a high angle, the rounds would shred them. She shifted the transmission into reverse. She didn't look back. She used the backup camera on the dashboard display. "Hold on," she said. She stomped on the accelerator. The Suburban surged backward, its run-flat tires shrieking on the smooth concrete. Martha wasn't aiming for the exit ramp. The helicopter was blocking it. She was aiming for Akram. The terrorist leader had just peeked out from behind his pillar, raising his AK-74U to fire at the helicopter. He never saw the black SUV thud. The rear bumper of the 3-ton vehicle slammed into Akram, crushing him against the concrete pillar. There was no scream, just a wet, mechanical crunch as the threat that had hunted them through the building was erased. Martha shifted to drive. She spun the wheel hard to the left. The helicopter pilot saw the movement. The minigun spun up again. Bert! A line of tracers stitched across the hood of the Suburban. Sparks flew as the rounds deflected off the angled armor of the engine block. The windshield shattered into an opaque web of white cracks, blinding her. "I can't see!" Sophie shrieked. "We don't need to see!" Martha shouted. "We need to move!" She reached for the center console, flipping the cover on the diplomatic emergency panel. It was a feature standard in high-threat embassy vehicles, an oil slick and smoke screen dispenser. She hit both switches. Nozzles in the rear wheel wells sprayed a thick black cloud of smoke and synthetic lubricant onto the garage floor. Martha floored the gas. She aimed for the only exit the helicopter couldn't block, the service wall. The garage wasn't entirely underground. The north wall faced the street, comprised of decorative brickwork between structural columns. It wasn't designed to stop a tank, but it would stop a car. Unless that car was moving at 60 miles per hour and reinforced with ballistic steel. "Brace!" The Suburban accelerated through the smoke, invisible to the helicopter's targeting systems for a crucial 3 seconds. Martha steered by memory and the vibration of the engine. They hit the wall. Crash. The impact was violent. The airbags didn't deploy. Martha had disabled the sensors on the dashboard, knowing they would incapacitate her. The brickwork exploded outward. The heavy grill guard of the Suburban acted as a battering ram, punching a hole through the masonry. The SUV went airborne. For a heartbeat, they were weightless, suspended in a cloud of brick dust and night air. Then gravity reclaimed them. The vehicle slammed down onto the asphalt of the side street, the suspension groaning in protest, but holding. Martha fought the wheel, the run-flat tires gripping the road. They were out. Behind them, the Little Bird helicopter flared over the roof of the embassy, searching for the target. But they were already moving, disappearing into the chaotic traffic of the city at night. "Are you hit?" Martha asked, her eyes scanning the rearview mirror. "No," Sophie gasped, checking her limbs. I don't think so. Is Akram—" "He's gone," Martha said. She didn't elaborate. The girl didn't need to know she was riding in a vehicle that had just been used as a hammer. Martha checked the dashboard. The engine temperature was rising. The radiator had taken a hit, but the vehicle was still moving. She pulled the radio from her belt and tossed it out the shattered window. They could track that. "Where are we going?" Sophie asked, her voice small. "The airport?" "No," Martha said, turning down a narrow alleyway to break the line of sight from the sky. "The airport is watched. The agency controls the airspace. If we go there, we die." "Then where?" Martha looked at the girl. Sophie's face was streaked with tears and dust. She looked like a ghost. "We go to ground," Martha said. "We disappear. I have a safe house in the old city, lead-lined, no electronics." She reached into her pocket and touched the data drive. The Blue Jay file. It was the only leverage they had. As long as she held it, the agency would hunt them. If she released it, they might kill them out of spite. It was the ultimate deadlock. "Sophie," Martha said, her voice softening slightly. "Your father, he kept a backup. That's what this drive is. He knew they might come for him." "He knew?" "He suspected," Martha lied. "That's why he hired me. Not to clean the floors, to clean the mess." It was a kindness. a lie to give the girl a sense that her father wasn't just a victim, but a player, a hero. Martha turned the SUV onto the main boulevard, blending in with the civilian traffic. Above them, the sound of sirens wailed, but the chopping rhythm of the helicopter was fading. They had survived the kill box. Now they just had to survive the world. The armored Suburban was a beast, but it was a wounded beast. Steam hissed from the radiator, and the suspension groaned with every pothole in the narrow streets of the old city. "We have to ditch the car," Martha said, scanning the sky through the spider-webbed windshield. "They have thermal, they have satellite. In 5 minutes, this vehicle will be a magnet for every Hellfire missile in the sector." Sophie was clutching the dashboard, her knuckles white. "But it's bulletproof. If we get out—" "If we stay in, we are in a coffin," Martha countered. "The agency doesn't fight fair. They don't chase, they track. We need to go dark." Martha swerved the SUV into a covered market alley, a souk, shattering wooden stalls and sending fruit crates flying. The heavy roof of the market blocked the line of sight from the sky. "Out, now," Martha ordered. They bailed out. The air smelled of spices, rain, and diesel. Martha popped the hood of the SUV. She didn't try to fix it. She pulled the dipstick, wiped it on a rag, and then jammed it into the battery terminal, creating a direct short. Sparks flew. "Fire in the hole," she whispered, grabbing Sophie and dragging her into the labyrinth of stalls. Behind them, the battery exploded, igniting the oil and fuel leaking from the engine. The SUV turned into a fireball. "Why did you do that?" Sophie coughed, shielding her eyes. "Thermal bloom," Martha explained, pulling a dark shawl from a vendor's stall and wrapping it around Sophie's head. "The fire creates a heat signature so massive it blinds the drone sensors for about 30 seconds. That's our window." "To go where?" "To become invisible." Martha led them deeper into the maze. She moved differently now. The limp was gone. The hunched posture of the janitor was gone. She moved with the gray man cadence, matching the flow of the crowd, checking reflections, never looking up. But the city was waking up. The local police, the terrorists' remnants, and the agency's cleaners were all converging. Martha stopped at a public phone booth, an ancient, graffiti-covered relic. She didn't make a call. She reached underneath the metal housing and felt for a magnetic key box. It was there, placed 10 years ago. She opened it. Inside was a set of keys and a burner phone. She checked the phone. One message draft, saved in 2014. Address, 44 Blackbird Lane. "Is that a safe house?" Sophie asked. "No," Martha said, crushing the phone after memorizing the address. "It's a broadcast station." The Blue Jay drive in her pocket felt heavy. The agency thought she was running to hide. She wasn't. She was running to a place where she could scream the truth so loud that even Langley couldn't silence it. 44. Blackbird Lane wasn't a house. It was a subterranean server node for an independent newswire service, abandoned during the Civil War but still drawing power from the city grid. Martha kicked the door shut and wedged a steel chair under the handle. The room was dusty, filled with rack-mounted servers and a single uplink terminal. "Plug it in," Martha ordered, handing the Blue Jay drive to Sophie. "What are you going to do?" Sophie asked, her hands trembling as she connected the drive to the terminal. "I'm going to negotiate," Martha said. She stood in the center of the room. She could hear them outside, the heavy boots of the SAD team on the stairs. They weren't being subtle anymore. They were coming to breach. Martha pulled the stolen radio from her belt, the one she hadn't tossed. She keyed the mic. "Sierra 1," she said. I know you're stacking on the door. I know you have breaching charges. Asset 09, the voice of the Overwatch commander replied, cold and metallic. There is nowhere to run. Surrender the package. We can still make a deal. The package is already connected to the uplink. Martha lied. It wasn't connected yet. The system was still booting. She needed time. I have configured a dead man's switch. If my heart rate monitor stops, or if I release this button, the files go to the New York Times, the BBC, and Al Jazeera. Simultaneously. Silence on the line. You're bluffing. You don't have a biometric relay. Do you want to bet your career on that? Martha asked. Do you want to bet the director's career on that? The file contains the dirty bomb schematics, but it also contains the transaction logs. The agency bought the bomb, didn't they? To stage a false flag. This was the final gamble. The deduction she had made from the burn notice. The agency wasn't cleaning up a terrorist mess. They were cleaning up their own operation gone wrong. Hold position, Overwatch ordered his team. Inside the room, the terminal beeped. Connection established. Sophie looked at Martha. It's ready. Upload it, Martha mouthed silently. Asset 09, the voice returned. We are authorized to offer you extraction, new identity, pension. Just give us the drive. I don't want a pension, Martha said. I want a guarantee. Sophie Stevenson walks away. She gets on a plane to Zurich. She is never touched, never monitored. And you? I stay here, Martha said. I'm the insurance policy. Agreed. Send the girl out. Martha turned to Sophie. The girl was crying. You have to go, Martha whispered, handing Sophie the drive. She had uploaded a copy, but kept the physical drive. Walk out. Keep your hands up. Don't look back. They'll kill you, Sophie sobbed. I'm already a ghost, Sophie. Martha smiled, a sad, genuine smile. Ghosts can't die. She pushed Sophie toward the door. She moved the chair. Sophie walked out. Martha slammed the door and locked it again. She stood alone in the dark room, listening to the footsteps fading away. Then, the footsteps returned. Heavy. Fast. Sierra 1 to team. The girl is secure. Sanitize the room. They lied. Of course they lied. Martha looked at the uplink screen. Upload complete. She didn't have a dead man's switch. She never did. She just needed them to pause long enough for the data to fly. The breaching charge blew the door off its hinges. 2 weeks later. The news cycle was dominated by the embassy siege scandal. Leaked documents, source anonymous, had revealed a botched intelligence operation involving illegal arms sales. Heads were rolling at the CIA. The director had resigned. Sophie sat in a private room in a clinic in Zurich. She was safe. The agency couldn't touch her. The spotlight was too bright. A nurse walked in. Miss Stevenson, you have a visitor. He left this for you. The nurse handed her a small envelope. There was no return address. Sophie opened it. Inside was a single object, a cheap plastic name tag. Blue. It read, Martha. Sophie clutched the tag, tears welling in her eyes. Flashback. The room at 44. Blackbird Lane filled with smoke. The SADI operators stormed in, weapons raised. Clear! Room clear! They found the laptop. They found the open window at the back of the room. A rappelling line dangled into the sewer system below. They found blood. A lot of it. But no body. Present day. Sophie walked to the window of the clinic. She looked out at the Swiss Alps. Somewhere out there in the shadows, a 60-year-old woman was limping. Maybe she was cleaning floors in a bank. Maybe she was scrubbing dishes in a diner. Martha hadn't died. She had done what she always did. She cleaned up the mess, and then she vanished. Asset 09 was gone. The janitor remained. Sophie pinned the name tag to her shirt. It was a badge of honor. "Thank you," she whispered to the wind.